wanted to start my talk today because with this word Kundalini, because what happened to me was a little bit different than a near-death experience because I did not die. There was no traumatic experience that happened before I had the awakening. In fact, I was lying on a massage table getting body work because of my back. I had received a lot of body work over the years since the age of 16. I started getting massage and chiropractic work and acupuncture long before anyone was really doing, especially acupuncture and chiropractic. They called chiropractors when I was young a bone cracker. And now lots and lots of people have been had the privilege of having that specific art applied to their aches and pains. And so I did not have what is typically called a near-death experience because I didn't die in order to have that awakening or that transformative experience. I did start practicing yoga when I was 18, and that was a long time ago. It was before anyone really knew what yoga was. And I started practicing it because it was really good for my back. And so the fact that I had this tremendous injury at a young age really opened up the doors for me to the healing arts. And I learned a lot about the healing arts at a very young age before people were really practicing all the healing arts like they are today. So I want to explain to you a little bit about what is Kundalini. What does this word Kundalini mean? Kundalini is a term from the yogic tradition for the power of the divine. She is the latent female energy believed to be coiled at the base of the spine. So they say that Kundalini is, and you can kind of see a little bit in this picture, the very bottom, I'll show you, put a cursor on there. That's where the Kundalini is supposedly coiled. And they say that the Kundalini is two snakes, one coiled here and one coiled here. One is called the Ida and one is called the Pingala. And they say when you start to open up these energy centers, now a lot of people are more familiar now with these energy centers that are called wheels of light, and they're called chakras, wheels of light. And they move up the energy centers move up the body. And so what they believe in a Kundalini awakening is that the snakes start to uncoil and they start to unfurl around these energy centers. And these energy centers are pierced open until finally the energy moves all the way up the spine and the energy comes out the top of the head, where you can see in this picture you're connected. This incredible connection to all living creatures, to all living everything in the universe. So, what is Kundalini? It is Kundalini that creates the universe. She's the creator of all creations, which is pretty amazing when you think about that. Sometimes she's called the face of God. And I know in a lot of traditions, I know that in Judaism, for Jews, they say that you can't look directly into the eyes of God, into the face of God. So for the mystical texts, the Kabbalah, which are the mystical texts, when a person has an awakening, they see this all-encompassing, all-knowing, all-loving light. And it's this light that brings you to the very essence of who you are and allows you to, for the first time, really truly know and understand that light exists not only in you, but in every other living creature in the universe. She is the ultimate goal of all yogas, the awakened mind and the transcendent vision of saints and sages. Now, remember I told you I started practicing yoga at a very young age, but at that time I was mostly doing what's called the physical portion of there's eight limbs in yoga. So I was doing what they call asana, which are the physical postures. And I mostly did those for a good part of my life before I ever knew that Kundalini was a thing. So when I had my awakening, I was not aware of Kundalini, that it was a possibility. And in fact, I really wasn't practicing yoga as a spiritual tradition, but more to relieve the pain and in my back. By knowing Kundalini, all is known and life is saturated with ananda or bliss. So imagine that you're looking out and everything you see is love. You see everything coated and covered in love. And it is truly blissful, really, really blissful. The Eastern traditions revere Kundalini as the great mother who gives birth to all. I loved that because, first of all, being a woman, now this is a spiritual tradition, it's not a religious tradition. But when I was growing up, I noticed that a lot of religious traditions were had male figures as their figureheads. So here is a tradition that actually includes the feminine side of spirituality. And they call Kundalini the Great Mother. So I could really, really relate to that. And she gives birth to everything. When our mind is saturated with her, we have a direct experience of our connection to all living creatures in the universe. We understand that what we do to ourselves, we do to others, and what we do to others, we do to ourselves. That's that mystical connection, that deep, deep understanding and unconditional love that spreads from you to every other thing and every other life form in the universe, and from every other life form back into you. Every spiritual tradition has a name for her. Christians call her the Holy Spirit. Jews call her Shekhinah. Qi is the word used by the Chinese culture describing the life force energy that permeates the universe. So I believe we live in the sea of energy, which is why I call myself a spiritual healer or an energy worker, because I feel everything energetically. Bodhicitta is the Buddhist term. And in Buddhism, bodhicitta is the mind that knows empathy and compassion for the benefit of all beings. What a wonderful way to be in the world. Spiritual seekers of all faiths, shamans, yogis, monks, priests, nuns, and many more ask to be shown the way to her. She will appear to everyone in the shape that is most comforting to her or him. So I think it's really wonderful. This energy is so supremely intelligent that when it appears, it doesn't want to frighten anyone. So it will appear to them according to the cultural or the traditions that that person grew up with. So for me, it appeared as a light, but for someone else, it might appear as Jesus or Buddha or a saint. There's so many different ways of this energy appearing. There are as many ways for it to appear as there are life forms in the world, in the universe. So, Kundalini. She's often used to refer to the power of the divine in each person. We all have two aspects of energy. The first one contains the physical world around us and inside of us, representing the body, the mind, and the ego with all of its wants and desires and needs. And this aspect of energy keeps us separate. So when we are around, when we're surrounded by our ego and our mind and the desiring mind, we always have needs. We're always looking for the next thing. And this is not bad or good. It's just a quality of us, but it does keep us separate from the second aspect of who we are, the second aspect of energy, which is believed to sit coiled at the base of our spines. And that's the Kundalini energy. And the Kundalini energy or a Kundalini awakening is the most profoundly important event in the event of, or in the lifelong experience of a soul. So it's a very, for me, it was the most important thing that ever happened to me. And it was an incredible privilege to have that experience. Let's see what else we have. Oh, here we go. So here you can see it again. In this picture, it's pretty great. You can really see how it unfurls along the spine. And as it unfurls, it starts to open up the energy centers along the body until it finally pops out of the top of the head. And it kind of feels like your head is popping off. But you can see this being is completely transformed. She has this light flowing all around her, and there is energy just pouring through her and out of her. So some of the ways that an awakening like this might happen can be through a ritual that is specifically designed for the transmittal of the power, like an initiation ceremony, or baptism used to be used as an initiation ceremony. Lots of different traditions and different cultures have all of their own rituals, their own words, their own ways of moving towards that place of knowing, that innate knowing that we're all connected. It can also happen through different yoga practices developed over the last thousands of years. I know that yoga has, like I said, because I've practiced yoga for so many years, there are 8 limbs of yoga. And the physical practice that's practiced here mostly involves the physical practice of asana, the different postures. But as we move through the 8 limbs of yoga, it actually brings us to a place where we can connect to that energy source, whatever you choose to call it. It can also happen through prayer, through devotional practices, through mantras, which is repeating a certain word over and over again. It can happen through selflessly serving others. Sometimes it's through ritual dance or drumming. It can be precipitated by a near-death experience. A lot of people who have died and gone to the other side will come back with their stories and their experiences of meeting their creators. It can happen through trauma or through pain or deep, deep sorrow, which can definitely, the gift of desperation can very often lead us to a place of connection, of deep connection. One-pointed concentration, which is another one of the 8 limbs of yoga. In the dream state, sometimes it's given by a wise being. You are initiated through the dream state into an opening, a little portal that you can slip through. It's even possible for one to have been initiated in a past life and have signs of awakened Kundalini in this life without any recollection of a past life. And actually, that's the way it was explained to me, because when it happened to me, I had 3 little kids, and I could not understand why me? And I remember thinking, and that's why I named my book The Reluctant Mystic. I kept thinking to myself, why are you picking me? Can't you see I'm really, really busy? Could you please pick someone else? And what was explained to me was that I had been practicing for many, many, many lifetimes, and that I had died in my last lifetime right before the awakening happened. So in this lifetime, it was given to me as a gift from all of the hard work that I had done in many lifetimes before. Though Kundalini awakening is the greatest prize on the spiritual quest, the blessed soul receiving the grace is on their way to the realization of the highest process, But this is not without peril. Oh my goodness, it can be quite a ride. When Kundalini rises, it is with the intention to bring the body and mind into fully expanded consciousness. The process can be an ecstatic bliss, as well as periods of extreme distress that can mimic psychiatric disorders. So there was definitely a question in my mind. While I was definitely experiencing bliss, and I did see the world in this beautiful blue color, I saw all kinds of things that didn't seem like they were based in reality. And I did have some questions, like maybe I had had a psychotic break. It was so otherworldly that, and there was no frame of reference for me on the earth to explain what had happened to me. It was an experiential experience with no language. And therefore, I had a really hard time speaking about it. And in fact, I really didn't talk about it for quite some time, which I'll explain to you in a little bit how I finally came to know what words to use. So sometimes Kundalini can stir up a latent disease in the body as well as psychological disturbances. So even though the aspirant is moving towards that place of enlightenment, it's not always completely filled with bliss. There are all different ways that the Kundalini can get stuck in the lower energy centers down here. And without going into any names, I have worked with people that have had risings before, and the rising got stuck here, and then it would pop up to here, and then it would come back down here. In fact, it could be very, very complicated for people who are getting their energy stuck in their lower centers. And it has rendered individuals unable to work, to carry on life. I know for me, the first years were a little bit not a little bit, they were very overwhelming. It felt to me like I could put my hands through walls because the physical world had melted completely. I was having a hard time learning how to maneuver in the physical world and do things like go to the grocery store, pick up the telephone, and remember, I had 3 little kids that I was trying to take care of. So it was kind of a confusing experience. And here it is again. You can see, okay, so here's a good picture. This is the Sushumna is the central cord that goes through the energy cord that goes through the body, and the Kundalini lays latently down here. Everybody has it. And then it starts to unfurl. It goes through the energy centers and it pops out through the top of the head. And you can see this person. I like this because it just shows you that we have these energy centers. They're called chakras. And I know the main chakra system kind of goes through. And I felt that over a period of 6 weeks. My body started to shake involuntarily. And I could feel the energy bubbling up inside of me, piercing open these energy centers, preparing my body for what was going to happen next. So these are some of the physical symptoms that you can feel of a Kundalini awakening. So in the beginning for me, there was a lot of trembling before I actually had the complete opening. My body started shaking involuntarily. And for me, I later, many years later, learned that there was a name for that. I didn't know what it was. It felt very blissful. And later on, I found that it was called a body orgasm. So my whole body was shaking, and it was creation moving through me and opening me, expanding the energy center so that I would be prepared to have this top energy center opened, and so that I could connect on every level to that energy, that divine energy that moves the universe. But there are other things that can happen that did not necessarily happen to me. I'm going to just go through some of them in case any of you out there have had them. The trembling did happen to me, sensations of hot and cold, rushes of energy through the body up and down the spine. I did feel that. Fear, anxiety, weight loss or weight gain, food cravings, none of those things really happened to me. Visions and out-of-body experiences, that happened after the final out-of-body experience that I had. I had visions with my eyes wide open, and I had visions at night. I didn't eat or sleep for 3 months afterwards, so I was having visions in the nighttime. And then when I finally did start to sleep, I had lots of mystical visions of oneness and dreams of mystical oneness. Body movements and yoga postures happening spontaneously during meditations. Those are called kriyas. So sometimes the body will just spontaneously start moving on its own. That happened to me after I had the awakening, where my body would start. And a lot of it sounds really like maybe you've gone crazy. So you can see why there might be a lot of confusion about what is happening to the individual while these things are happening. Retention of breath and other changes in breathing patterns. Breathing is very, very important, and there are certain breathing techniques that can bring about an awakening. And I have spoken to many other people that said they were practicing a certain type of breathing breathing exercise, and that brought about an awakening. Again, going back to my study of yoga and the 8 limbs of yoga, one of the limbs of yoga is pranayama, which are breathing techniques. And through these breathing techniques, you can start to open up your energy centers. But if you're practicing breathing techniques and you don't really know that the end result can be an awakening, it can be quite frightening when you're doing these breathing techniques and all of a sudden you have an out-of-body experience. So those can bring about an awakening. You can be practicing mantras or different sounds rising from within, sometimes the Tibetan singing bowls or tuning forks. I know that there's a lot of sound healing that can bring about awakenings. Distortions of time and space. Because we live in a body, in a physical world that I believe is contained in a box of space and time, where we have space and time. And then I know from my experience, when I left my body, there was no space or time. There was limitless space and eternity of time. And so I had broken through or slipped through a portal where there was no time and space. There can be, and that's why there can be distortions of time and space when you're out there. Changes in appetite or in food. So I mentioned that I didn't eat for 3 months afterwards or sleep. And I didn't eat because it felt like all the energy was pouring in through the top of my head and it was coming through my body. And every time I put something in my mouth, it felt like I could not get the energy of the food to go down. Like that energy was all being used up. It was going out the top of my head, it was coming in, and I could not get anything. I could not swallow anything. But I'll tell you, people would come up to me and say, and I didn't lose a lot of weight. I mean, maybe I lost 10 pounds, but people saw the light coming out of my eyes, and it was really kind of funny. I mean, I do believe that supreme energy has a great sense of humor, because people would come up to me and say, Nancy, did you go away on a vacation? What did you do? You look great. What have you been doing? And they didn't know, but I knew what they were seeing was that divine energy that was pouring out of my eyes and pouring through my pores and my skin, and they could feel it, but they didn't know intellectually what it was. So sometimes there are habits or addictions that will drop away. There'll be inspired creativity. And this next one really did happen to me. Boundless states of ecstasy and love arising for no apparent reason. I all of a sudden knew when I looked into the mirror for the first time, that I could see the love pouring out of me, and I could see my spirit. I could see that I was created absolutely perfectly, and that I would have challenges moving through my experience, but that these challenges were part of my growth, part of my expansion. They were opportunities to become an even greater version of myself. And not only did I see that light in my eyes, but I could see that light coming out of every other living creature in the universe. I could see it sparkling off the leaves and the branches of trees. I could see creation expanding all around me. I could see the light in every other living person and animal and creature in the world that I came across. And for me, there was this boundless love that was pouring not only out of me, but out of them. And it felt like I met everyone on that level of creation, that boundless, expansive, unconditional love. So another thing that you can imagine that happened to me after that experience, that there were shifts in my values and attitudes, and it had a major impact on my relationships, because as I started to see myself as a being of love, I could see that everyone else was a being of love, and that some were more protected and more armored than others, but that everyone had that light inside of them. So Kundalini opens the doors of perception to vast realms of consciousness that's always available to us, but that we aren't necessarily open to, that we can't see, that we can't hear, that we can't quite feel just yet. My meditations afterwards included visions of oneness, mystical oneness. There were vibrant colors and sounds. So I noticed that I could see colors that other people couldn't see. I could hear things that other people couldn't hear. Sometimes I still hear the voices of the spirits that have crossed over, or I'll see colors. I was working with a woman because I'm painting the outside of my father's home, getting it painted. And we were out in the light looking at color swatches. And I could see everything completely differently than she could. And she's been working with color for years. And she finally turned to me and said, "You must be seeing something that I'm not seeing here." Because every color had either rosy pink, the color of love, or a little bit of blue mixed into it, which is the color of bliss. And I'll explain that a little bit later. But I could also start to smell things. So when my children were little, and I had hypersensitive senses anyways, but when they were young and they said they didn't want to go to school, I would say to them, "Okay, let me smell your breath." And I learned that I could actually smell sickness on someone's breath. So I knew, sometimes they just needed to stay home, but I could actually tell whether they were really sick or not just by smelling their breath. Infinite expanses of utter stillness throbbing with an absolute fullness of being. To me, that just brings me back to that feeling of being utterly connected and bathed in unconditional love. Tears of joy, that happened to me quite often for the first 5 or 6 years, streaming down my face as love beyond measure coursed through my body. That would happen to me quite often. I called them tears of knowing at the time, and I did not know at the time that that was a thing, that people called that tears of knowing, tears of unconditional love, tears of connectedness. Kundalini's gifts are absolutely incomparable, and after receiving them, no one is ever the same.